It's been on the cards for a long time. If you go back to the period 2019 to 22, cocoa prices are around one quarter where they are now. So it's really in the last year we've seen them treble, almost quadruple, and they still are around $10,000 a ton. And it's been driven by numerous factors. Unfortunately, we've seen this coming for a long time. It's not just to do with things like inflation, high fuel prices, disruption to supply chains. We're seeing the real results here of climate change and unsustainable farming. Farmers moving into protected forest areas which are not good for cocoa cultivation, and after 2 or 3 years the crop is collapsing. So if you like, all the chickens have come home to roost, and we really have a perfect storm of concerns over not just the crop now but the future crop, and that's why prices are eye-wateringly high.
It's quite interesting to read various financial media headlines, and some of them were going with headlines that cocoa prices are much higher than copper prices. And it was quite interesting to see those dynamics. Have we ever been here before where we're starting to see cocoa prices trading a lot higher than copper prices?
Well, it did actually happen back in the 1970s. I mean, there was the witch's broom disease in Brazil I think it was 77, 76. That was a time when Brazil produced a large proportion of the world's cocoa. And so the prices went incredibly high. But if you factor in inflation, they're higher now. And I think the reality is here that there is just a concern that the world is at least 500,000 tons short when it comes to production this year. Everyone is scrambling to get the beans. Now, there is a question about how long can the market take it at this incredibly high price, but until there's some kind of improvement on the production outlook, or until we really see grinding and demand falling, we're going to see these prices continuing. And it certainly is unprecedented. They've never been this high before. What's the impact on the farmers? Well, this is the thing which is really difficult, because for farmers who are facing fixed prices, let's say in Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire, particularly in the case of Ghana, where there's been a huge depreciation of the currency, a lot of inflation, they haven't really been seeing the benefit. But of course, there are many exporters which have seen a huge benefit in terms of the cocoa they're exporting. If you think the smaller producers, let's say in Nigeria, Cameroon, or even in Latin America, like Ecuador. So it's been a very kind of mixed picture here, but we've seen the governments reacting. And for example, Cote d'Ivoire has just announced that it's going to pay more now for the mid-crop beans, and the mid-crop is due to start this month as well. So they're trying to feed some of this increase back to the farmers, but as always, it takes a very long time to trickle down. I'm curious, though, we're seeing this rise in cocoa prices. What does that rise look like if we had to then factor in the other soft commodities like soy, etc.? Well, I mean, it really depends. We've actually seen soy prices coming down. We've also seen, for example, grain prices, which were incredibly high after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They've also come down to the levels they were before the COVID pandemic. And that's because actually there have been relatively good crops in the southern hemisphere. So it is very much, it just depends on what's happening with weather patterns. We've got El Nino happening as well. That actually sometimes brings better weather to certain regions, but worse weather to others. So cocoa is definitely going in a different direction from the other soft commodities. But the reality is, farmers respond, investors respond, they invest in new trees, new production. Could we find ourselves in 4 or 5 years' time with prices collapsing again? So what's your expectation for the second half of the year in relation to cocoa prices? And I suppose the second part to that question is, what should the viewers be paying attention to in terms of the dynamics on that front? Well, I think they're going to remain prices very, very high. Whether they can remain around $10,000 a ton remains to be seen. The reason they're so high at the moment is that everyone is looking for cocoa. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire are still trying to meet cocoa for the contracts of the main crop, which is now finished. And they're looking through the mid-crop beans to try and fill that. So if everyone is after cocoa, and if all the international off-takers are worried there isn't enough, that's going to keep prices high. But at some point, the market's going to have to give. And so I think the reality is that us as consumers, we're going to first of all experience higher prices for our confectionery, but also we're going to have more of this shrinkflation in there. We're going to find our chocolate bars are a bit smaller. We're going to find that they don't have as much cocoa in there, as much cocoa butter. And it could be now that the typical chocolate bar that we eat, that's going to become a luxury. And the other kind of chocolate we're going to eat in the future is going to be watered down chocolate, because the market has to respond. It just can't keep taking these incredibly high prices.